The Zionist movement, dedicated to establishing a Jewish homeland in the Middle East, emerged in the 19th century, but it reached new heights and gained new momentum during the First World War. I'm Indy Nidell. Welcome to a Great War special episode about Zionism and the First World War. The idea of Zionism was not a new one. Jews had dreamed of returning to the land of Zion since Jerusalem was sacked and the temple destroyed in 70 AD. And of course, small groups had returned throughout history. But in the 19th century, Zionist leaders created the World Zionist Organization. Most of these leaders came from Germany, and the headquarters were established in Berlin. After a series of pogroms in Russia, many Jews fled from there to Palestine, which was then part of the Ottoman Empire. Settlers there worked mainly in agriculture to turn what was underdeveloped wasteland into a land of milk and honey. They were supported by wealthy Jewish philanthropists like Montefiore and Rothschild. Then the war broke out. The World Zionist Organization declared itself neutral, which made sense since Jews were living in and fighting with armies from nations on both sides. The organization relocated its headquarters to Copenhagen. Now, not everyone agreed with this policy, though. Chaim Weizmann was one such Zionist leader who didn't. He was born in what is now Belarus and studied chemistry in Germany and Switzerland, though by the war, he was a senior lecturer in Manchester in Britain. Now, he wished to see higher education and scientific establishments founded in Palestine. Weizmann was asked by the British Admiralty to solve the shortage of acetone, which was needed for making cordite. That he did for over 2 years, setting up manufacturing plants and training chemists. This also brought him into contact with Winston Churchill, First Lord of the Admiralty, Prime Minister David Lloyd George, and Foreign Secretary Lord Balfour. These contacts helped Weizmann with his Zionist activity. One of his most important contacts was Mark Sykes, Chief Secretary of the War Cabinet and one of the authors of the Sykes-Picot Agreement, which planned the post-war partitioning of the Middle East. Sykes, and others in the War Cabinet, believed that a Jewish Palestine would be valuable for the British, and they encouraged and supported the Zionists. In January 1917, Weizmann wrote a memorandum regarding the Zionists' wishes that he hoped would become a formal declaration by the British government about Palestine. The Zionists wanted clear, formal support for a British protectorate over Palestine, which eventually would enable some form of Jewish self-government. Balfour wrote and gave a draft to Rothschild in July 1917, and after debates and discussion, the Balfour Declaration was published November 2nd. It read, "His Majesty's government view with favor the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people, and will use their best endeavors to facilitate the achievement of this object, it being clearly understood that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine or the rights and political status enjoyed by Jews in any other country." The timing for this publication also had to do with Russia. Russia seemed like it was on the verge of leaving the war, and the declaration could be used to persuade Russian Jews to continue the fight, telling them it was in their Zionist interest that the Allies win. The Bolshevik Revolution days later pretty much ended all that, since Russia did pull out of the war. But what of the Jews already living in Ottoman Palestine? When the war broke out, Ottoman authorities canceled the protected status that had been given to foreign subjects in Palestine, which affected many Russian, British, and French Jews. They were now considered citizens of enemy states, and half the population was deported to Egypt or imprisoned. And Allied ships could no longer arrive at Palestine with charitable funds, so poverty struck. The Ottomans confiscated food, raw materials, and machinery from the farms, and Hebrew schools were closed. In fact, the attacks were aimed specifically at Zionism, its leaders, and its institutions. Other than the many Jews actively serving in the armed forces of their nations and empires, there was specifically Jewish action during the war. Joseph Trumpeldor, a Russian Jew, tried to convince the British Army to create a Jewish regiment from the displaced Palestinian Jews. The army said it was not possible to have a unit of foreign soldiers fighting in the army, but a supply and transport unit was okay. Around 400 men and 10 officers, mainly Russian Jews or Jews from Egypt or Palestine, formed the Zion Mule Corps, which served at Gallipoli. though this caused morale issues since the men who joined thought they would be helping to liberate Palestine. After the disbanding of the ZMC, a Jewish battalion was officially announced in August 1917, the 38th Battalion of the Royal Fusiliers, which included British volunteers, former ZMCs, and many Russian Jews. In April 1918, a 39th Battalion, made up mostly of American and Canadian Jews, joined them, and a 40th Battalion of Palestinian Jews also later joined them to unofficially form the Jewish Legion. There were 2 further depot battalions stationed in Britain, but the other 3 were in the Middle East, and the 38th and 39th saw action in the Jordan Valley against the Ottomans. Thing is, the British command in the region didn't really understand London's decisions with regard to Zionism in general, and the purpose of a Jewish legion. In an area where Arabs were the majority, those leaders saw no reason to support Zionism. The legion was demobilized at the war's end and left with enough men to form just 1 battalion, the 1st Judean. From Ottoman Palestine itself during the war, Aaron Aronson, a leading agronomist, gave detailed reports of the region to the British command after making his way to Britain and then Egypt. His sister Sarah, who remained in Palestine, was the leader of Nili, a local spy ring that managed to send a lot of information to British HQ in Cairo, but a lost carrier pigeon eventually betrayed the group's existence and the Ottomans soon broke the ring up. Sarah committed suicide after a few days of torture without giving up any information, and other agents were caught and hanged in Damascus. There was also a lot of talk regarding post-war Arab independence in the Middle East, an Arab nation under King Faisal. Weizmann and Faisal met in 1918 and agreed that Faisal would support Jewish settlement in Palestine, and Weizmann and the Zionists would support the establishment of the Arab nation. They signed this agreement in January 1919, but Faisal conditioned it on receiving the chunk of the Ottoman Empire the British had promised him, but he never got that, since the British and French cut up the region according to the Sykes-Picot Agreement. So the Weizmann-Faisal Agreement never came to anything. David Lloyd George said to Israeli Prime Minister David Ben-Gurion many years later about the Allied double-dealing, "I'll be frank with you, during the war they gave the Arabs and Jews conflicting assurances. We sold the same horse twice." The Zionist movement, before the war, was a small group of dedicated and ambitious Jewish leaders who had many opponents both within and without Judaism, and there had been little hope of establishing any sort of Jewish-run state. But the war changed borders, politics, and cultures, and Jewish contribution to the British war effort began to change the situation. The Balfour Declaration was a big step forward, and with the British now in charge of the Palestine region, Zionism grew worldwide. The first steps were taken to turn the Ottoman province of Palestine into a modern democracy under the British mandate. In a quarter of a century, it would become the Nation of Israel. We'd like to thank Myroff and Daniel for the research for this episode. If you'd like to see our episode about Jewish soldiers in the German army, you can click right here for that. And do not forget to like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter. See you next time.